Hi, this is Stephen Meade. Over the years, I've read hundreds of books and spent thousands of hours developing what I call the BullsEye belief system. And I've used that system to develop my own companies, as well as help others learn to be specific, targeted, and focused to get exactly what they want in life. This is the BullsEye Guy podcast. Stephen Meade back again with another BullsEye Guy podcast. And as you guys know, I always like to try and give business information, networking tips, really try and add value to move the needle forward. And a lot of times we have great guests. Last couple of weeks, we had some really amazing interviews, and we're always fortunate and excited when people can come on. But every now and then I do a post or a podcast it's not designed to be political. I joke that I'm not politically correct. I'm politically direct. And I get accused sometimes of picking sides. I don't pick sides. I just look at things as an observation and go, oh, what's my view of this situation? And how do we evaluate it? And how do we make it better? And what I want to talk about today are the protests. Any of you that have been following along, obviously it's a massive tragedy. George Floyd got killed in Minnesota. Ahmaud Arbery run down in Atlanta. Quite a bit of frustration and angst, and obviously behind me and in front of me you can see the political protests are going on fast and furious, and it's a tough situation. It's really difficult when you try and talk to people, and I've said it before, you make decisions emotionally and defend them logically. In this world, people don't even want a logical argument. It's 100% emotional, and it's really getting frustrating. If you don't agree with somebody on one side or the other, I'll say the other side, whatever that may be, again, you're an ist, you're a this or that, a racist, a supremacist, an antifist. It's just a combination of how we communicate. And I think, in my opinion, the press has done us the greatest disservice. The press is manipulating the population. They are spinning narratives to fit their own ideology, and I think that has a lot to do with it. And again, this may come across as white privilege, it may come across as political. It's not meant to be any of that, but I'm going to get into something I observed about the protests. And I think this is probably relevant for almost any protest, but particularly these in America around the incident with George Floyd. So any of you that know kind of what happened, I'm not going to reiterate it, but there's a lot of angst and anger, and rightfully so, of people who wanted to protest the killing of Mr. Floyd, of George Floyd. And what you have is what I ended up calling the 4 layers of a protest. And here's what I mean by that. Behind me right here is a picture. I don't even remember where it is. It may be Washington, D.C. or something, but it's typical of most of the protests. You have a layer, and I'm going to call it the peaceful protesters. And everybody's all, oh, it's a peaceful protest. Well, we'll get into the definition of that in a minute. But I saw a lot of amazing things in the peaceful protest. I'm in Beverly Hills most of the time, right on Rodeo Drive during the day. It was pretty fascinating. There were people dancing and chanting and hugging, and I didn't get close enough, but it looked like a group of actually Native American Indians or something were dancing, and people were joining in. And there were other parts of the country. I saw protesters with the cops taking a knee and doing the chicken dance. And, they're allowed to peacefully protest, and this country's built on that. And then right at the edge of the peaceful protesters, you have some slight antagonistic, but again, still not bad. You've got those protesters that'll walk right up to the front of the police. And what a tough job the police have. Again, I'm not picking sides, because obviously there's been some bad apples and bad things happen. But these police officers are there standing their ground, maybe protecting something, maybe protecting the crowd. And you've got a certain group of people that are pretty in their face, yelling, spitting, holding signs. But again, the police haven't done anything, because that layer of protests are what I will call peaceful. And again, it's not up to me for definition, but this is just what I've been observing with this going on. So layer 1 is really the peaceful protesters. And again, if I move over, you can see a bunch of people here in the front and the police officers standing up there. And we see it on the news all the time. Then we get into Level 2. Level 2 is what I call the angry protesters. Now they still, and I say they loosely, it could be any creed, any color. I'm not picking sides. This is, again, it's unfortunate you have to define yourself as a non-racist post when you're just talking about a group in general. But that group, they, whoever they are in that layer 2. Layer 2 is what I call the angry protesters. Not even the agitators. We're trying to pick these quaint little words to describe people. No, they're angry. They're yelling, they're screaming, and even that's okay. But what the angry protesters tend to do is act like terrorists in Lebanon. And again, I'm not calling them terrorists. Like this whole post is going to be full of qualifiers. I'm not this, I'm not that. Terrorists, a lot of times in a foreign country like Libya, will hide themselves in a hospital or a school. And that terrorist, wherever it is lobbing rockets, but they're being protected because you can't go in and bomb a hospital. That's kind of what I see happening with this level 2 or layer 2. The angry protesters are behind the peaceful protesters. Any of you that have been watching, if you're honest with yourself, if you're honest with the actual description and honest with what's going on, not emotional, that layer of angry protesters are throwing stuff. They're throwing bricks and concrete and frozen water bottles and signs, like all kinds of things are being thrown at the officers who are there trying to keep the peace and allow the peaceful protesters to continue to peacefully protest. We have every right to peacefully protest, but when you start getting into violent protesting, that's where a little bit of this line starts getting crossed. And that's what you see happening a lot of times is the angry protesters are the ones who are agitating. And I've watched this. There's some really, horrific is an interesting word. There's some really tragic, scary, sad, horrific ones going on, but there's some different examples. There's one in Boston with a gentleman, older guy, again, not picking sides, but I think context matters. He's a professional agitator. He's there to agitate. He's a protester, but he's almost a professional protester. He's always there. Earlier in the day, he had been seen trying to get people to step up and start a fight with police and get punched. And again, whether that's right or wrong, that's his right. But what happened is the police were given an order to start moving the protesters out. Curfew had happened. This is the same thing outside of Washington, D.C. in an area where the president was going to a church. It's been highly, highly politicized. But when we start breaking it down, looking at what's going on and what are the solutions and how can we work together, it's the angry protesters. So this particular instance, the police are given an order to move. They're marching forward. They're yelling at people, you need to move, 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 stand back. And a particular gentleman walks through the police into the police officer's face and is raising his hand doing something. What does the police officer do? I'll tell you what he doesn't do. Again, these are observations. You have to be honest in these things. The police officer doesn't take his baton out and whack him in the head or start beating him. He holds the baton and pushes him in the chest just to kind of get out of the way. This protester is through the line of police, has been given an order to disperse, to move. Excuse me. At what point is peaceful no longer peaceful? If these were normal times, and again, this is by far not normal times. If that was normal times and a person was given an order not to do that and walked up to a police officer and put his hands on him, that's an assault. That's assaulting a police officer. We don't have that because the news frames things as a peaceful protest. When does the line of peaceful get crossed? This poor gentleman got pushed back. Older guy fell on the ground. Now he's bleeding. And you've got police officers who are given an order to march and clear. You've got other police officers trying to get in to help this poor gentleman. But was it really peaceful? Again, I may get flamed and destroyed on this, but I'm looking at it going, if I'm there and want to peacefully protest, my protest is getting hijacked by agitators in the back who are causing a problem. And that's what I've noticed a lot is when the police start moving forward, they're moving forward because they may get rocks thrown at them again or bricks. But what's between the police officer line and the angry, agitated protesters are the, quote, peaceful protesters. So of course the news, being dishonest and disingenuous, looks at it and says, oh, the police attacked the peaceful protesters. It's just a peaceful protest. And it's interesting. It's called moving the goalposts. And I watch it on news all the time, and I watch multiple channels. So don't accuse me of being one side or the other. I watch all of it because I like perspective. What happens when you press somebody, especially in the news? Oh, it was a peaceful protest, and you point out that the angry protesters were throwing boxes. Then they change the verbiage. They move the goalposts. Well, it was mostly peaceful. Well, now what defines mostly peaceful? If it's mostly peaceful, does that mean it's partially angry? Like mostly peaceful, the minute that person admits that it wasn't a full-on peaceful protest, we're getting to a layer of honesty that nobody wants to admit. Again, not being racist, I'm just looking at the protest, trying to figure out how does all of this work? And so that's what I call the level 2, or the angry protesters. But unfortunately, they stand behind the peaceful protesters, and therein causes that line of conflict. And we've seen it through the news over and over again. The next level, it's called groupthink. It's called the mob mentality. And again, let me preface, I'm not calling everybody a mob. I'm not calling everybody thugs, even though Trump called people thugs, but so did Obama. A thug is a definition of somebody, who's meant to hurt. It's not picking a color. But that level 3, to me, is really an interesting dynamic. It's crowd dynamics. And we watched it, or at least I watched it, and I watched it happen in Santa Monica. And it was pretty, again, fascinating. I'm at a loss for adjectives because it was horrifying and fascinating, tragic, disgusting, disturbing. But what do I mean? Within Santa Monica, there was a line in a certain area of the peaceful protesters, and the police were lined up, and it was proceeding as a peaceful protest should, and they were walking down the street. 3 blocks away was rioting, looting, madness. On television, on camera, you're watching people just bust down doors and run in and out. But within that group was something I noticed after the fact. And it's what I call the group thing, the mob mentality. If you've been at a sporting event, you get caught up in the emotion. If you're at a church, you get caught up in the emotion. If you're at a mob or a rally, you might get caught up in the emotion. And I watched people doing things that you're thinking, are there this many people out there that are really just so blatantly criminal? And again, if you're breaking into things, you can be protesting. That wasn't a protest. But that level 3, to me, were people that were basically caught up in the mob, caught up in the moment. And they were sucked into something because they were there, but it might not be the way they normally are. And I know that because, again, watching on television, I watch a lot of this stuff. I watched a couple instances primarily in Melrose of West Hollywood where the following day, there were people who had stolen goods the night before and were showing up and returning those goods. Often no questions asked, right to the owner, apologizing. They actually interviewed a guy, and he's like, look, I got caught up in the moment. These are my stores. This is my neighborhood. I feel bad about it. I just wanted to return it. And they wanted his name, all that. He's like, no, this isn't about it. I just wanted to return. And I actually went down to Santa Monica. Again, I watched these stores getting destroyed. And it's unfortunate. If you talk about property being destroyed and buildings, you get attacked. You get attacked that people are saying, oh, property's more important than person. Why do you care? A building. Well, that building to me is an interesting representation. I watched a building burn on Melrose Avenue in LA that was owned by a friend of mine who's got 2 kids and is an immigrant. Is his life worth again, these are such difficult times. I watched buildings being set on fire in Santa Monica that have apartments above them. That's a different level of saying this isn't about just protecting property, it's protecting people's lives. I have a lot of friends. I have friends in New York who have kids and families, and we're looking forward to going back to work. And their entire building, their retail stores, their restaurant, things have been destroyed. So it's this layer of groupthink that moved into the rioting that's had this profound effect. But I think within there are groups of people that in a normal day or normal time might not have got caught up in the melee, and they did. And then I come to the fourth group, and this one's a bit, to me, it's a little scary. It's frightening, and this is an honest assessment of watching full-on criminal activity. The rioting was one thing, the looting is another. This was full-on organized criminality. And again, I'm not picking sides. I don't know if it was the left group that everybody knows the name of, or the right group that everybody knows the name of, or if it was the right group acting like the left group and a white guy with an umbrella to look like the black group. I don't know. I know I saw all colors of people in there. But what I also know, and I saw and I recognized from some of my other work, were some of the people standing around without their shirts on and a whole lot of gang tattoos. And I ended up close to one of the riots and watched, it was organized. It was an organized robbery. 3 blocks away in Santa Monica, you had peaceful protesters, a few angry protesters, but the police, for the most part, stood back, contained, riot gear, getting stuff thrown at them, but maintained that distance. 3 blocks away, it was organized chaos, but it was organized criminality. There's cars pulling up. There's spotters telling people where to go. Certain guys would jump out, get the door open. The minute the door was open, everybody else would pile up, right? You don't need a bunch of people standing around while you're trying to break a door down. So 2 or 3 guys working on the door. The minute the door's down, the crew rushes in. Bags coming back, running, filling up the cars, moving on the phones. It was organized criminal looting. And again, this isn't a racist post. It's not meant to say that Black lives don't matter or things like that. I'm not trying to take somebody's moment, but in honesty, the moment has been taken. The moment was taken by the rioters and the looters. There's more animosity now towards the group and the movement, and more anger that's being built up. And I just don't know what to do about it. And I'm starting to see it a little more. There's a glimmer of hope that when people are talking online and when they're talking on the news, they are distinguishing now. When you start talking about this happened with the police, you're like, oh, well, that's not the peaceful protesters. That was the agitators. That was the word du jour that came out recently, agitators. Again, the agitators to me might have been the angry guys throwing bottles. The agitators might be the people walking right up to the police or trying to walk through the line. I don't know what the definition of agitator is. People were just trying to be politically correct. And I'm politically direct. These were agitators, but it was full-on criminal. So layer 1, peaceful protesters. And we've seen that in the last couple of days. This is Monday. I can't even remember what day it is. The last 4 or 5 days, there's been thousands, 10,000 people at these marches and protests and rallies, and they've been peaceful. The police have let them go, as they should. They've been given orders if they need to move around. They've been on bullhorns and getting people together. And the mayor of Minnesota walked into a group and took a verbal bashing, but it was peaceful. People weren't throwing things at him. They didn't attack him. The mayor of Minneapolis walked through a crowd of pretty angry people, no security, not dressed up, and stood there. And when he got asked afterwards, they called him some pretty bad names, said, "Go home, Jacob, go home," chanting, "You're going to be voted out." When they interviewed him afterwards, he's like, look, he goes, I don't agree with everything that they said. I agree that things need to be changed. Systems need to be changed. The process are broken, but part of that process is the right to free speech, and they have a right to be angry. Again, fascinating dynamic. So the riots are moving forward, not the riots, the peaceful protests. We're hopefully at the edge of this. But again, when you talk to people, let's try and distinguish. Let's have respect, appreciation, admiration, support, whatever we want to call it, for the peaceful protesters. And there could be 100 of them or 100,000. They're trying to make a difference. They're trying to get a movement. They're trying to start something to make progress. but it's the angry ones, it's the mob, and it's the full-on criminal looting at the back that tends to mess up the message. And what is that message? Again, this is the risk of getting in trouble, but I said this to a couple of friends. They got pretty mad at me, but again, politically correct versus politically direct, and I'll show you what I mean by that. There are a lot of slogans out there. And the Democrats, this isn't picking side, it's an observation. The Democrats, the left, they're amazing at emotional manipulation and sound bites. The rich can pay a little bit more. All of these sound bites, the Republicans don't have cool sound bites. I don't know why. It's like the rich can pay a little bit more, and then the Republicans want to argue the nuances of who's rich or who's not. Again, these are observations. But in the current mode of Black Lives Matter and BLM and this stuff with George Floyd, I became really frustrated. I'm finishing an article with a friend of mine. Yes, he's Black, African American. If I say that, then I've been accused of being a racist because I pointed out that I'm co-authoring with a friend of mine who actually is African American. We wanted to work together. But here's the point. Slogans are not substance. And I watched on the police all the time. It's like, oh, what are we marching for? Equal justice. That's a slogan, not a solution. Race relations, slogan. Better education. All right, that's a little bit of a slogan, but like how? What are the steps? What can we do if we, anybody, whoever a we is, want to support the movement? You can't support a movement with a slogan. My saying again is awareness builds apathy, actions bring achievements. And I'm not saying people are apathetic to what's going on with the Floyd movement right now, but if you don't have something to do, if you're not pressing for change, systemic problems. Well, systemic problems means there's a problem with the system. So what is the system and what is the problem you're trying to fix? And I'm looking at all these: raise the consciousness, let the voices be heard, join together for change. Those are slogans. It was so frustrating, so frustrating. So started looking at the problem, started trying to backfill into what's really going on. And again, I've had a pretty good life. Yes, I'm white. I grew up in the South, so I've been around Black and African American my whole life. I don't see color. At least I don't think I do. I hope I don't. I see people for their actions. I've got a lot of great friends that I hope would attest to that with me. But when I looked at it, I started saying, well, wait a minute. If the problem isn't really, again, the numbers are the numbers. The problem isn't really police are out there hunting and killing Black people. I hate to say it that way, but when you look at the numbers, people get mad at you. This year in 2019, I think there's been 20 white people killed by police and 9 Black individuals killed by police officers. And out of that, I think the numbers are like 6 had a gun or criminal, and out of the white people is 12 or 13. The numbers are the numbers. You can dispute them all you want. You can call me a racist. You can lie. That's the numbers. But that's not what I thought was the real premise. And so I started having a conversation. And what I started looking at, and this again, I think is what some of the title's going to be, is there's a difference, I believe, and in talking, I'm getting a little validation. There's a difference between harassment and homicide. And that is where I think the distinctions really start coming in. White privilege, call it whatever you want. For the most part, I can walk down the street and not be stopped because I'm in my own neighborhood. I have Black friends that can't happen to. I could go jogging and not get run over and shot like happened to Ahmaud Arbery. I could probably get pulled out of a police car and not have those kinds of things happen to me. It's the constant perception and can't even think of the word, perpetuation of harassment and anger that starts building up. And then we started looking into it, and I was like, well, wait a minute. Let's take, for instance, the cop in Minnesota. He had 18 prior complaints against him. 18. That's harassment. Long before it got to the homicide of George Floyd, that is harassment. What's the harassment for? I was curious. I liked looking at things. I said, oh, out of those 18, I want to see, is he only harassing black people? Is there a race? Is he harassing women more than men? Like, what's the predictive indicator? What's the pattern of abuse that builds up anger that led to that homicide? And when you start looking at how that officer is able to stay involved, it starts coming down to, and again, I'm going to get in trouble, it's the unions. It's the politics. When you say the system's broken, you've got to look at what's broken in the system. And one of the things that's broken is this aspect of self-policing. If a cop gets accused of a complaint, it's the cops that investigate themselves. Or a district attorney. How's the district attorney get his job? By politicking, going out, and he has to get votes. So who funds a lot of the district attorney's campaigns? The police unions. This is the circular side of systemic racism. I'm not picking colors. I wanted to get to a solution. Raising the consciousness doesn't do anything for me. 1, 2, 3, 4, what can you do? And so we started doing some research, trying to break this down. And then I watched the Democrats. The Democrats came out today with their plan, and they've got some good points in there, believe me, but it's interesting they're still not fully and fundamentally attacking one of the most systemic problems within the problem of systemic racism. And whether it's systemic racism or systemic harassment, it needs to be stopped. So I created something called S.T.O.P, and I'm going to share it with you here now. It may or may not work, but to me, I like to get to systems, like steps, something you can do that's not a political slogan. So S.T.O.P, it's called Stop Police, and I haven't figured out the rest of it, but S.T.O.P stands for something. It's an acronym. Number 1, S.T.O.P stands for Special Prosecutor. If a policeman is accused of harassment, it should not go to internal affairs and a district attorney who have a political motivation to not investigate the police. That is a fundamental systemic problem. Needs to go to a special prosecutor, outside counsel, somebody who doesn't have to run and suck up and get votes. And it just happened in Minneapolis and in Minnesota. It was forced to they took the George Floyd case from the district attorney up to Keith Ellison, who is the attorney general, to prosecute that case. That's why sometimes when something bad happens like Floyd, the Department of Justice comes in. You need an independent special prosecutor. And the most obvious one is that my friend Benjamin Crumb is doing an amazing job. He's the attorney for George Floyd. If you can support any of those causes, please pick one and support it. But they brought in their own autopsy. The internal autopsy for Floyd tried to cast aspersions on George Floyd. Again, I'm not picking sides, I'm just reading. Said he had amphetamines and had underlying heart conditions, and any of those could have contributed. Crumb's like, well, let's have our guys look at it. And the independent auditor said, yeah, he had all those things, but he died because somebody sat on his chest for 9 minutes. Independent auditors, you have to take the investigation out of the police. So the first S in S.T.O.P stands for Special Prosecutors. Second one is transparency. This is where I think blockchain could really do something interesting. We did research trying to find Siobhan. He's the police officer in Minnesota. And out of the 18 complaints, they're not public. We got access to about 8 or 9 of them, and they're verbal complaints. There's not a lot of information. You don't know the sex of the person. You don't know the age. You don't know if it was in their house or on the street or in the car. You need data, because with that transparent data becomes predictive analytics. And with predictive analytics comes accountability. You need to be able to hold an officer accountable or get rid of him when there's a pattern of harassment long before there is homicide. Has to happen. What does the O stand for? Other officers. Again, I'm using Floyd as an example. What a tragedy, but so many moving parts going on with that. There were officers who stood there. Apparently, some of them were also on the other end of Floyd, holding him down. And everybody that's looking after the fact, Monday quarterback, I would have rushed up there. I would have said, no, you wouldn't. You would have stood there on the porch or on the curb like everybody else and yelled at the police because nobody could believe the police were going to sit there and suffocate a guy. But the other police officers also have a duty to stand up and stop those efforts from happening. That's the O. That's immediate. This isn't education. People need more education. Has to happen over time. Better income for blacks. And I agree. But again, politically correct, politically direct. I had to make this point with a friend of mine who was saying it's all about education and income. And the amount of people that get stopped in a lower income may be higher. I don't know. But I have friends who are black. They're rich. They're educated. They still get stopped. Police officer can't look at somebody and go, oh, that guy's educated, I'm going to leave him alone. I want better education. I want better income. That's not the systemic part of the problem. The problem in the system is the harassment and where it stops and how do you stop it long before it becomes homicide. And the last one is promptness, prompt charging. Again, my numbers aren't exactly right. I'm pretty close to on, but it's interesting. It takes an average citizen, and any of you that have watched TV, there's something called the 48 hours. Right? Most crimes are solved within the first 48 hours, and they try and find that person and get them and arrest them and charge them. It happens quick. Average time for a police officer to get charged, if they even get charged, is 8 to 12 months. Think about that. If you're a family who lost a loved member, who had somebody harassed or beaten, or any of the atrocious things that a very small percent of the police population do, you want justice. You want that day in court. You don't want 8 to 12 months wondering if it's going to happen. That's why people are angry. I get it. I'd be angry. I'm scared when a police officer pulls up behind me and I don't usually get stopped. If I got stopped for no reason, I'd be angry. The system is broken, but we have to fix the system. So again, may or may not be the solution, but to me it was better than a slogan. But I like, STOP stood for Stop Police Brutality. That's what I wanted. That was my slogan, Stop Police Brutality. But the S.T.O.P stands for things that could be implemented now. Will people do it? I don't know. It's political. The Democrats came out with their plan today, and they didn't go after the police unions. They didn't make it clear that they're trying to take the prosecution away from the police. And there's a problem with that. And it's political and it's money motivated. It needs to change. So again, Stephen Meade, the BullsEye Guy. I don't always like to do these kind of rants. And again, I hope they come across in the spirit I mean them, because I want things to change. I have a lot of friends across the board. And if it's Black lives right now, that's fine. That's great. It might be a woman tomorrow. It might be a Black woman. It might be anybody. The system has to change. I want to help change the system. That's it. Stephen Meade, the BullsEye Guy. Tune in next week. I can try and assure you it'll be a more lighthearted one, I hope. We'll see what happens between now and then. But I'm Stephen Meade, the BullsEye Guy.